All right, so I think while we wait for the rest of the participants to join, we can already start by me welcoming everybody to today's meeting of the EURADA Strategic Foresight Working Group, and especially warm welcome goes to our speakers today and also to former speakers of the previous meetings that might have joined already or will be joining in a second. I see that Betty Ann already joined the participants. Almost exactly 1 year ago to the day, this working group met for the first time to begin an, we can say, exploratory voyage to understand what role foresight methodologies and exercises play at regional level in Europe. And here, of course, with a particular interest in the role of regional development agencies. And also to learn what foresight practices are already established at European and international level, again, with a particular interest in regional place-based approaches. Today marks the 5th meeting and the end of that voyage for the time being, as this is the working group's final meeting. Before I give the floor to Rafael Martinez from our member Infomurcia, who initiated this working group on strategic foresight, a very brief look at today's agenda. First, Rafael will present the findings of the working group. Then Christian Matti from the JRC will present to us the 2023 Strategic Foresight Report of the European Commission, followed by a Q&A session and closing remarks from our director, Roberta. And lastly, some usual but unnecessary housekeeping remarks. Today's meeting is being recorded as we received multiple requests from members who couldn't attend to have the recording available to them. Of course, it goes without saying that you please mute yourself while not speaking, and we suggest that you gather all questions regarding any of the presentations today for the Q&A session. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and would like to give the floor to Rafael. Please, the word is yours.
Okay. Thank you all the participants for attending the presentation of the conclusions of this working group that I must say that has met the expectation that I had when in June 22 we proposed in EURADA its launching. We proposed ourselves 3 objectives for the working group. On one hand, mapping the initiatives to know who is who and what is happening in this incipient field of foresight, at least in regional development agencies. Second, know at European level what organizations were doing activity in foresight, and moreover, with emphasis in regional approach of a regional basis. And third, the third objective is, okay, now we know each other. There are possibilities to cooperate and design joint projects. So to start the activities in the group, we proposed a survey to know what were the expectations in every regional development agency. That is, what was the role of foresight in their organization? Was it to anticipate scenarios and trends, or was it to identify risks and opportunities for our companies, our clients, or to transmit knowledge to these economic sectors? And we begin with this survey, and in September we met for the first time 16 EURADA members to discuss about concepts and motivation about on foresight. We did the survey. I must say that there wasn't enough answers just to take some conclusions, some very strict conclusions, but it helped us to begin. And in October we met the European Commission's DG Research. This was the second meeting, and Jürgen Wenger presented the main contents of the 2022 Strategic Foresight Report, twinning the green and digital transitions in the new geopolitical context. This twin revolution has marked our conversations along the working group. And the conclusion was that for the European Commission, it's a key issue. In fact, the Vice President Maros Sefcovic is promoting a working group and a pilot experience with his leadership. In January, we met the Joint Research Center, and this was a very interesting meeting because Joint Research Center and OECD they consider the regional basis in Foresight. So the working group of strategic foresight hosted Thomas Emelgarn and Katrin Bock. So Thomas Emelgarn stressed the importance to connect with EURADA, with the regional agencies, and Katrin Bock presented the different methodological approaches and exercises of the Competence Center on Foresight. They have a Competence Center on Foresight established in 2018. So this was followed by a discussion of possibilities to cooperate, and this was very, very interesting. The S1 unit is willing to cooperate with EURADA and its network. In March, the working group welcomed Delphine Clovell and Betty Ann Bryce from OECD. OECD Center for Entrepreneurs, SMEs, Regions and Cities. And they provide us insights on their work in the future of regions. So we were thinking that we were closing our expectations. We were advancing in our expectation of what to do in Foresight in the regions. Foresight becomes a key tool to enable future-proof regional policies. This was what we were looking for. And so OECD has published a number of reports, such as the upcoming OECD Regional Outlook 2023, Scenarios 2045, now in July of this year. So this was a very fruitful meeting. The second half of the presentation of OECD was focused on rural and areas and the exchange with urban areas, and this was something that we have spoken about it, because now the twin revolutions blurred the difference between rural and urban, or speaking about sustainability, urban wastes, industrial wastes. We had to have a more global approach, and this was very interesting for the working group, because we are regional development agencies, and normally we don't work with citizenship, but in Foresight we have to take into account the citizenship, take into account cities. So for us, it was a very interesting trip. Finally, also in March, we met EURADA Info Brussels office, met the new unit of strategic planning, foresight and interinstitutional relations in the Committee of the Regions. That is very interesting because when our regional politicians are interested in foresight, it means that probably we will have to work in foresight in the future. And I think that that's a good proposal. We provide with foresight, this new unit has the intention to provide with foresight capacity inside the Committee of Regions for staff, for members, and for politicians. So this was the meetings we had, and we prepared this communication to all EURADA members, and we have made a report that we can send you to all participants and also the rest of EURADA members in the following days. And now I want to share you some key findings that we have had along these meetings. Not many EU regions are currently active in foresight, but there is a growing interest, despite we are still in incipient state of knowledge about foresight. Nevertheless, we have found available tools to adapt to regional scope. So this is the good news. So we think that in this situation, Regional Development Agency had to be key actors because they are involved in regional planning and they have contact with the rest of stakeholders in the ecosystem, regional ecosystem. So I think Regional Development Agency have the best position to lead the foresight exercises in regions. Talking about thematics, I have already mentioned green and digital are challenges that defy our regions, defy the agenda for territories. And I have put the 5 different paradigms because of what I have mentioned before. The limits are blurred. We cannot speak only about industrial sites, but we have to speak about territories. And it is critical to involve since the first moment to our companies, to our clients. I think they will ask us to be in this activity because strategic foresight is linked with the development of corporate social responsibility. So I think we have a lot of things to do about in foresight. And each region should define its own approach. If we are the leader of a group of stakeholders, if we have to bring foresight to the corporate strategies of our companies, that this was the questions that we had at the beginning, with the role of foresight in our regions. So to follow up next steps, next actions, I think we have to, there's a mistake in this person. Sorry. One of the next step is not, the first step was about further collaboration between EURADA, regional development agencies, Joint Research Center, OECD, and the Committee of Regions. We have to think over if in which landscape, in which project can we cooperate. We have the next step in the agenda of EURADA channel. Let's say, I think EURADA is going to put in its working program the Foresight. So in the agenda in EURADA, next step is the European Week for Regions and Cities, and we will speak in one webinar, in one workshop about Foresight. And I think that is the idea that I wanted to share with you. I think EURADA is going to explain more in detail how we are going to follow integrating Foresight in the normal activity of EURADA. And if you have any question, I'm here to answer you when the presentation, when EURADA decide to establish the questions question moment. Okay, thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you very much, Rafael. Yes, I think we can only agree that this very much is the beginning of a journey when it comes to strategic foresight in EURADA, in our work program. We still hope that Roberta will make it to join us later on to maybe explain a bit more about our current plans. But for now, I would like to give the floor to Christian Matti from the JSC for his presentation on the what the European Commission has been doing on strategic foresight in the, or is developing in the last year. Christian, the floor is yours. You should be able to share your screen, I believe.
Thanks, Jerome, for the opportunity for being here and present the results of the work of 1 year on the Strategic Foresight Report. So I'm going to briefly present the process and the results of the report, but also some kind of attractive methodological aspects that could be very attractive for a reflection about the space that the regions and cities has in order to design and implement any kind of foresight activity. As it was mentioned before by Rafael, I'm coming from the EU Policy Lab that include a Competence Center on Foresight that is led by Thomas Hemmelgarn and Katrin Bock. So we combine in the Policy Lab 3 different aspects: the design for policy, behavioral insight, and this Competence Center on Foresight. In particular, in the Foresight, in the Competence Center for Foresight, we manage different activities concerning future-oriented studies, including technology foresight or emerging risk. But this report in particular is very important because it's a kind of an important milestone for one of the pillars that is sustainability transitions. That is the pillar where I'm leading. So the story, a brief story about the Strategic Foresight Report started in 2020, where there was a kind of a joint publication between the SecGen and the Joint Research Center. And from 2021, you can find that there are two communications, the communication of the Commission and the Science for Policy report with more methodological elements and also a little bit more of granularity in terms of the content developed by the JRC. So we have strategic autonomy in 2021, a green and digital future, the twin transition in 2022, and the last one that is focused on social and economic aspects of the sustainability transition, that is the current report. So this year, the report, as I mentioned, focused on social and economic sustainable Europe and how we can strengthen this kind of the role of Europe in the world. And this is important because, as you know, because of the different geopolitical situation, not only because of the war in Ukraine, but also with other consequences connected to climate change, there is an emerging discussion about geopolitical aspects concerning the access to different resources and the strategic relations with different countries in terms of different policies connected to trade, climate change, and even migration. So this geopolitical element is something added to this discussion on social and economic that actually really shape the discussion over the process. So this is kind of the full process, and I'm not going to get into the details, but I just want to spot somehow the complexity of the process in terms of the level of participation of different actors over the process. So we will see now the methodology in general, but as you can see, there were workshops, there was also call for evidence organized by the SecGen, consultations with member states, with the European institution and ESPAS, and many other consultations, ones that we got the results in May and June. And finally, we adopt the report early July this year. But the overall process started in September and finalized in July. It was a very intense process that was not just a couple of workshops, there was a lot of interaction. As part of that, this is kind of more the methodological logic of the process. In terms of open participation and workshop, we have two main workshops, but simultaneously there was always this kind of process of desk research, harvesting and processing the results of any interaction. Everything started in September with developing some sketch of the scenarios that were instrumental to have a discussion about Europe in 2050. Then in the first workshop, we discussed these scenarios and tried to sketch the transition pathway, how we get to those scenarios. We will see later on how we have done that. With that elements, we go back to analyze and we interact with experts and many other organizations with the results, and we got the transformative elements that we identify in these different pathway of change. Finally, we went back to the workshop with all this information and we tried to understand what are in all this pathway of change, transition pathway, what are the strategic areas of intervention for the Commission to take decisions in the following years? And as part of that, we elaborate further, and we focus in the concept and the idea of agency that is very important for regions and cities, because it's agency as the concept of capacity to act. Okay, not as the agency as institution, and it's very attractive because it makes a distinction about the different capacity that EU, member states, regions, and cities can have in different type of interventions. So this includes different webinars with the JRC expert, but also different online meetings and written contribution, as I mentioned, from different organizations, including 60 JRC experts involved in the Foresight process. So it was a kind of a collective effort. So as I mentioned before, we start with the elaboration of the scenarios as a kind of an instrumental step to understand how Europe looks like in 2050. And as part of that, we use initial inputs from other studies like the Foresight study on Eco Innovation 2035 of the JRC and the new study of the European Environment Agency on the imaginaries for Europe in 2050. Those were the starting point, like kind of building blocks, but on top of that, we add an extra element as part of a sustainability assessment framework for the scenarios. We collect a series of contextual factors to define the discussion. And this is very important because you will see later on that we apply also this in the summer school for EURADA. So we try to identify key aspects to discuss all over the scenarios, like, for example, well-being, education, labor market, or resilience, or technology leadership, as a kind of an anchor for having a discussion across the scenarios. As part of that, we developed these 4 scenarios by considering this kind of 2 dimensions. The first one, the vertical one, as you can see in blue, is how the society can move from a more collaborative or collectivist society to a more competitive and individualistic scenario. And in the horizontal axis, you can see policy mixes not supportive of sustainability. It doesn't mean that it's against, but it's not necessarily going supporting sustainability, and policy mixes highly supportive of sustainability. And here what we are trying to say on policy mixes is trying to understand how there is this kind of intentionality that all the areas of policy works together to create a change. While if there's no supportive of sustainability, it means that they are more isolated. As part of that, we got these 4 scenarios that have the overall understanding of EU achieve climate neutrality by 2050. So this is what in practice are called normative scenarios, because it means that all of them try to achieve the same goal, but in a different way. Okay, so that was part of the logic of this report, trying to achieve sustainability in 2050. So there is a kind of a collection of trade-off and different roles of main actors in the different scenarios. I'm going to describe this a little bit now. So as you can see with these names, we have eco-state, a more collectivistic, but kind of supported to policy mix scenarios. So national governments are very important. In the bottom, we have Greece business boom. It's kind of more individualistic. You still have the systemic issue, but the markets and the private sector is leading the scenario. On the left side, we have on the top is a kind of a collectivistic type of society, but not supportive of sustainability transition in a systemic way. Why? Because it's the global eco-war, it's kind of more people-centered, there is more granularity there rather than centralization and coordination. And finally, we have the scenario that is greening through crisis, that is a kind of a responsive scenarios. These 4 scenarios are instruments. It helps us to understand what's the range of possibility that the futures can bring. Okay, so they are not predictions of the future, are instruments to understand different completely situations and trying to understand what makes sense in terms of the difference between scenarios. But as part of that, we can have a discussion about how to bring change. And that is what we have done as part of the methodology. We have right now some kind of sign of news, some trends that can help us to understand what is going on. And we have the scenarios. And in between, what we have done is try to discover what are the transition pathway, the way to get to those scenarios, to understand what does it mean, the change that we need right now in order to move into a sustainable future. And the attractive things about that is that we brought this concept about a transition pathway from sustainability transition with the scale up and the phase out. So we really push people to think about new things that needs to come, new practices, new technologies, but something even more difficult and more important, things that needs to be phased out. We need to eliminate things from the current system to move into sustainability. So that's you can see now in the X curve. You can see the blue arrow of the X. So it's scale up, new things, emerging innovation, new technology, new practices, and the green one phase out is the kind of things like fossil fuels, for example, or like even like using cars or any kind of unsustainable practice in agriculture that we need to take out of our system. As part of that, we have done, it was not just a workshop, it was not just like a couple of exercises, it was a very complex interaction with participants and experts in order to understand the complexity of that. So there was this kind of interplay between thinking about the future, but also sustainability transition in terms of understanding what is the change that we need to bring. And as part of that, there was always this kind of narrative that I think is very attractive for discussion with regions and cities. It's not about only what in terms of change, but also about who should do that and how. So this brings the idea of agency, about the different capacity of the different actors to act. So in order to move from the transitions pathways, these patterns of change to the areas of interventions, we unpack all that knowledge, and we have done this comparative analysis with experts in order to identify the key areas that are transversal and cross-cutting among all the scenarios and the pathway. And this is what we got. So there is 4 clusters that are addressing mostly social and economic aspects. So as you can see, the first cluster is a new social contract. A second one that is particularly important for regions and cities, governance for sustainability. A third one on people and economy that include business model, but also skills and competence. And a final one connected to what I mentioned before, on the importance of geopolitical aspects. We have the global perspective. I'm going now just to go briefly through each of the clusters so you can see what are the main topics and how this can create new conversations between the different actors and in particular regional perspective. On the new social contract, we are trying to understand the kind of the urgent actions to address inequalities and transform the economy in that way. So it's important. There is an important discussion about where democracy is going, how we achieve social cohesion, but especially in terms of climate change, how we deal with intergenerational fairness in terms of how the current generation is being responsible about the generations of the future. There is a new discussion about well-being and also about how to move away from understanding the GDP and the GDP per capita as the kind of the indicator of the wealth of the nation, and trying to understand other aspects to concentrate in terms of understanding how we should invest and how we should design policies. And as part of that, what are the essential services to lead with that well-being? This one is particularly attractive for the discussion with regions and cities because it means that there is different roles of actors and policies, starting from the need of reviewing the public finance and tax systems, but also the different multi-level mechanisms in order to create better synergies in between the different levels, but also with the private sector. Indeed, in terms of that, we brought the discussion about sustainability and sustainable finance, about blended finance between private and public funding. This is very also attractive in terms of the regions as the kind of the ones that are connected with industrial and innovation ecosystem and can articulate that. So that's why one of the conclusions is the important roles of regions and cities for this transformative investment. The third one is on people and economy. So there is a mix of 2 aspects here. One is the understanding of new business models and practices, and the other is how we support a society to move into sustainable lifestyles. That includes not only education system, but a broad set of competence and skills that are not only useful for the development of future labor market, but also to work together as a society in a kind of a more cohesive and comprehensive way. Last but not least, there is this global perspective that includes the understanding of how different trends are going to affect the reorganization of value chain, and the geopolitical situation and globalization really call for a new understanding about a different type of relations with other countries and other kind of economic blocks outside Europe. At the end, what we have identified as a kind of a meaningful conclusion is that all these interventions needs to be understood in terms of a particular perspective about what is the agency, the capacity to act of different European actors in these interventions. I mean, member states, regions, cities, society, private sector, they can have different capacity to intervene and to actually propose any kind of action and innovation in all these strategic areas of intervention, and how we can see that over time. So I'm just going to briefly mention these three categories. So we understand is that there is an initial capacity on shaping what we have. And this is the kind of things that can be done with regulatory framework, with investment, with new regulations, with rethinking also how we can provide new standards and new practice for democracy. But this is the kind of thing that we can do because it's easy to manage, because it's part of the rules of the game and the current system. But the reality is that because we are thinking about the future, there is a collection of different elements, including artificial intelligence or the adaptation of climate change, that we don't know what to do in terms of the kind of the right choice or the right way to move, because there is uncertainty and the concept or the problem is very complex. It's still that we can do a lot of things and we can navigate that uncertainty and that complexity. So we really need to work together in understanding how these new topics can be faced collectively under uncertainty. And that's the kind of the navigation type of interventions that we need to have. Uncertainty does not stop different actors to do something, but it's a different type of interventions. And last but not least, and again, this is very important for regions and cities, in order to shape what we have, in order to navigate the uncertainty, we really need to orchestrate process and relations as a kind of a system. The portfolio of systemic intervention, we really need to think that all the interventions, projects, and programs are happening at the same time, and by being aware of that, be more smart about how we use that investment, but also how we remove barriers in order to make the different actors work together and create a strong relation to support these other interventions. And this orchestrating capacity is very much related to rethinking the governance models on different topics, from circular economy, climate change, the food system, or even like artificial intelligence and digitalization. Just in order to finish, I have 4 points that we can use to concentrate somehow the attention in terms of the result of this report. So we need systemic change, and for that, collaborations between the different actors of society is important. What is different from other report and other conclusion is that now there is an issue about urgency. The urgency of the actions require that all the actors work together, because there's no more time to have marginal innovation. We need to be more radical, and in order to do that, collaboration and agreements are important. That's why there is an agency of EU actors that can be different from time to time. So this is good, because it means that one actor intervenes, that could be the regions or the member states, enable other actors, as society or private sector, to act in some way. So there is this kind of mutual reinforcement between the capacity of actors. The interventions of each actor affect the capacity of other actors to act. And this is very important in terms of enabling the society to do things. What kind of actions, by taking the lead of member state, regions, or cities, can enable the society to take a lead in other aspects. That's why it's important to understand that the policy mixes are important in terms of the synergies between actors and this agency, and the scale and the complexity and the speed of change require dynamic coordination. That means that not everything is going to be perfectly planned or coordinated, but it needs this kind of continuity in understanding that the speed of the change and the scale of the change very much depends on how we make the machine works in terms of this kind of flow of decision-making and knowledge. This is the end of the presentation. I just want to spot that we have already applied this report as part of the dissemination and sense-making actions that we are doing. And one of these actions has been the presentation during the summer school of EURADA, where we open up these scenarios for a discussion with different participants. And the key question was, what the regions and the cities can do in this kind of future. And we got a very interesting result. It was very much inspired the what and the process to for change by the current discussions on the approach of partnership for regional innovation that currently is drafting a new playbook with a series of process that is trying to address this idea of sustainability transitions and change in regions. And as it was mentioned also by Rafael, next month we are going to organize this session during the European Week of Regions and Cities, where EURADA is going to be participating, and also different cities and regions are going to showcase what they are currently doing in terms of creating some awareness about the space and the capacity for regions and cities to work on anticipation, capacity, and foresight. Thank you very much, and I hope that we have some kind of a space now for questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Christian. That was a great presentation. And yes, the exercise that you did with us during the summer school was indeed a lot of food for thought. Some of the thoughts were more pleasant than others, but all I think very, very necessary to ask. And as you mentioned, I think the question of agency for RDAs is in both senses absolutely vital at the moment, of course, because we ask ourselves what is the future of regional development agencies, and what is their agency in the processes to come, and also when it comes to transitions and barriers. Is there other questions in the audience to either Rafael or Christian from the two presentations? Not yet. Maybe it takes a while to form the right question. There was a lot of input, a lot of food for thought. Yes, Betty Ann. I think if you, yes.
Got it. Thank you for the presentation. I had a question more, obviously I work on rural areas. So I wanted to ask the question more, as you think about it, our understanding, our approach to foresight, and what we find is that there's more, less ability to do it in rural, to take on board some of these great examples, great insights that could potentially help with policy design and so on in rural or smaller cities versus larger cities. So I wondered if there was any thought around the geographical dimensions to this and the capacity to learn from this and to kind of move forward, knowing that we have different differences in experience. And of course, we have countries that are in the EU that are ahead and some are still learning, but that divide is still important in terms of learning from this process. Thank you.
Should I answer now? Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Thank you, Betty Ann, for the question. Actually, you might be a couple of years ahead with the question, because we are doing research about how to answer that question. But the reality is that right now there is a kind of, especially after the pandemic, there is a kind of appetite, but also concern about regions and cities, about what is the anticipation capacity that you can develop at region and city level, and trying to decouple from the discussion at member state level or European level. So that is something that is kind of a re-emergence of a discussion of foresight in regions and cities. But the reality is that there's no too much development about that. Also in terms of understanding what is the space for anticipation at a regional and city level. So one answer that we are trying to get into in terms of that is how, in terms of sustainability transition, but also in innovation, this idea of innovation ecosystem can be like a kind of an element that can help to move beyond the jurisdictional barriers. Okay, so for example, you mentioned the rural areas, but we can think, for example, in the innovation ecosystem or the ecosystem around food and agriculture. Okay, so there's no jurisdictional barriers there, cities or rural or whatever, but still it's a territorial type of thing. And especially when you think about food security and strategic autonomy, about how the overall territory can start thinking about providing a kind of a sustainable equation for food. Okay, so there's no barriers there in terms of small, big cities or whatever. There is a different type of system. And the other type of things that are happening in terms of thinking on regions, cities, and also small rural areas is that how you rethink about the cooperation and the value change as a kind of an equation for the type of problems that we have in terms of reposition somehow the value of the place, but also understanding how can be more articulated with a long-term development, where we want to go in terms of Europe as society, but also in terms of member state, region, and cities. However, I'm going to try to answer your question at the end, okay? I'm not skipping your question. We are right now working in an experimental project trying to understand what does it mean a sustainability transition pathway in rural areas, okay? And something that is particularly attractive is that how you bring this kind of even annoying legal and technical problems on board, how you overcome especially the land use logic, okay, and also the jurisdictional issues, also in terms of the natural resource management, water, okay, in between small towns, rural areas, and cities. That is the kind of aspects that everybody knows. But how we think in a transition pathway, in a long-term transition pathway, how we overcome this kind of discussion that we have right now, and we can think in the long term about this kind of situations, because we are always stuck with this kind of more regulation and administrative type of discussion, and sometimes even political. And we really need to think in 20, 30, or even 40 years time. So we are right now thinking about how we can use the logic of pathways, okay? That means that there are several ways to get there, okay, rather than a single way, but really several ways to get 20, 30 years time from now. So I hope that maybe next year we start sharing some of the results about what does it mean in practice to deal with this concept of pathway in rural areas.
Rafael, would you like to add to that, maybe from your experience from the Murcia region?
I have already explained that for us, Foresight is to establish scenarios and identify drivers that drive to these scenarios. So we have to rethink if, for instance, the digital transformations is orienting rural areas to this scenario that we want for our territories, or if we have to rethink the strategy, because sometimes we have designed an idea of the digital transformation that is helping everybody, and perhaps it is not helping everybody. So you have to rethink, and you have to see if your strategy is driving to the final scenario that you have established with your with the rest of key stakeholders in your region, or if you are going far not approaching to this scenario. So that is in the same way with sustainability, in the same way with all the revolutions that we have to tackle, and if they help rural areas to approach to the desired territory that we want. So this is a question that Foresight can help, because if we do strategy for the next, if we plan as we plan the next 4 years for coming strategic plan, we have no possibility to rethink or react if something is wrong. So Foresight is giving us the opportunity to establish the scenario and identify the drivers that bring to this scenario. I don't know if, I think Betty Ann agrees with this plan situation. Okay.
Any other questions that you have to our speakers? If not, I see that Roberta was able to join us. I think you just got from your airplane. So if you would like to give some closing remarks, some outlook, please feel free to speak up. Not sure if the connection holds. Otherwise, I would also invite Lucia to give some remarks.
Yes, please give to Lucia because I'm here making my ticket in order to come to Brussels. I'm sorry, but the flight was late and I couldn't connect before. I'm really sorry. I thank all the speakers and Lucia and Murcia for the work done and JSC. So please, Lucia, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Lucia from the Info Brussels office. I met all of you during our meetings. Well, on behalf of Roberta and EURADA, I can just give you some closing remarks concerning the future of the work. I know that even though that the working group comes to an end, we already have some good findings. This line of work of Foresight, it's already embedded in the work of EURADA, because one of the main findings is that there is an interest, obviously, for all the members. And I would like really to thank all the speakers for all their contributions during this month. We are taking with us several interesting conclusions. We know that Foresight exercises must be embedded in long-term regional planning. So it's the perfect moment to start doing that and exploring how to do it. And regional development agencies are really a key actor in that process, being really close to the socioeconomic mapping of every region, also being most of them responsible or really close to the S3 strategies, and currently with the regional innovation ecosystems and the PRI exercises. And I think timing is really perfect, since we are already thinking of cohesion 2.0, so we can already start thinking of how we are going to introduce Foresight exercises for our regional planning, including the EU funds and EU approach. And since we have the horizon of 2025 for the first proposals for post-2027. So I think this working group came in a good timing with these conclusions and with your help, because that is another good takeout that we have today, is that the collaboration from all the EU actors, which are really key for us, so you can help us with everything we learn from you, like the tools and how to adapt them to our regions and all the milestones that we have to follow during the year. And anyway, we'll be in close contact. And I know that from the EURADA point of view, there is a strong willingness to develop collaboration with the GRC, the OCDE, and the Committee of the Regions in a structured way. So next step would be the European Week of the Committee of the Regions next October, as Christian was saying. So I hope to see everyone there, and we'll take it from there. So thank you very much, Jerome, and everyone from the Secretariat helping us with this work, and also to the speakers and everyone we had along the way. because we learn a lot, and I think it's been really helpful for all of us. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Lucia, and also from my side and the Secretariat. Thank you very much for the speakers and the interesting discussions. Last remark, as mentioned by Rafael, we will make sure to share the final report with you in time and see you at the EU Regions Week, which is in 2 weeks already, I think. So not that long to go. Thank you very much for being here today, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.